Hey, thanks everybody. Appreciate you coming out. I know it's been a long 2 days and we're at the end, so I'll try to keep this as exciting as possible and open to questions at any time, so feel free. You don't have to wait for the end if you don't want to. But I'm from Delphix, and I've been with the company about 2 years now, 2.5 years. Prior to Delphix, I founded an encryption company back in New York City doing one-time pad encryption. Then I went to work for Symantec after the company got acquired. I was there for about 10 years in New York, helping start the healthcare vertical, and then working with the CTO's office around market innovation. But then I came over to Delphix. So, and one of the reasons I did that is kind of the topic of what we want to talk about today. And that's the changing threat landscape that has pointed to data security and specifically data masking as one of the key technologies. So one of the things that has been changing is identity breaches and data breaches topping the list of threats today. I think there's been two, probably in the last 10 years, 10, 12 years, two major inflection points in information security. The first one was around 2005, 2006, when the amount of known malware actually outnumbered the amount of known good code created from the beginning of time. And that's when you saw antivirus vendors like Symantec and Trend and others start switching to behavior detection and whitelisting, because you could see what was coming, that at this rate there's going to be much more malware and bad code or malicious code out there than known good code, right? So I think about a couple years ago we passed another one, which was this concept of the breach. And no matter how you layer your technologies, you still are going to have some type of event that you have to deal with, and it's going to be going after your data, right? And that's where you see a lot of user behavior detection, real-time monitoring. How do you detect that you've been hacked and recover? You saw the industry switch to focusing on those technologies instead of your firewalls and your IDSs that people used to focus on. So again, that's because, excuse me, they're after the data. They're after personal records. You can actually, on the black market, sell someone's email and Facebook account more expensive than their credit card account, because it becomes more valuable with how they use it. They're able to spam everybody's friends and look like it's real. So one valid personal identifier with an email and a Facebook, I can maybe get 400, 500 people to click on a link and take them to where I want to get their credentials for something else. So this is really the threat now. It's your data, it's the personal information, especially inside the data. And it's a huge, huge shift. So it used to be perimeter security is where everybody spent their money, right? And now, I think Gartner put out a study earlier this year where perimeter security is now 5th on the list for spend in security, right? And I mean, think about firewall, IDS, data loss prevention, anti-spam. This is the perimeters where all the spend used to be. And now it's 5th, and most people not in information security probably couldn't even name the other 4. So it's a huge shift, and now the data is what you need to protect, especially the personal identifiable data. So when you look at that shift to protecting your data, that's where your risk lies now. The data is not just inside the 4 walls of your environment, but with partners and clouds and mobile devices. What Gartner has found is that production data makes up about 20% of the data in your environment, and you have this huge amount of non-prod data which could potentially be your largest exposure point. And this becomes especially true as more and more copies of data get made for development, for testing, for QA, for analytics, for backup, for DR. You have all these copies of your data out there, which creates a larger and larger surface area risk. And typically, the further you get off your production network, you have less security controls, especially if you're going into some type of cloud, offshore development, partner network. So you can see the problem that's happening, right? A lot of data, it's going everywhere. The further away it gets from my point of control, the more risk I have on that data. So how do you actually find out where all your data is and protect it and eliminate the risk that you have with that data? And that's really where masking comes in. And it's not just that you want to protect the data and keep you safe. A lot of times you're actually under some type of regulatory compliance where you're required to provide some type of protection on your data, especially if you're doing business in certain industries like healthcare, finance, anywhere in the EU. All right, so data masking. You know, why did I leave an encryption company and I'm up here talking about why masking is so good, since everybody knows and uses encryption, right? Well, the reason is, and if I don't know how many are familiar with one-time pad, technically the only unbreakable data encryption algorithm, right? But it had a huge hole, and that's identity. So the real reason why masking is trumping encryption right now for protecting data, especially when it goes out of sight, is because we can protect against identity breaches, and let me show you how. So what masking does is we actually take real information and replace it with fictitious information. We don't subset, we don't have to just give you X's and obfuscate the data completely. We actually create fictitious information which is worthless if leaked out or breached. And then we give that fictitious information to all your downstream environments or offsite environments, anywhere where you don't want your personal information to sit. And what this allows is all of your programs, all of your applications to work as they usually would because they're getting full data sets in the format that they expect. And because you're able to actually tokenize the data and get back to the original values on site, you can still do analytics and get value out of that data even after it's masked. Whereas encrypted data, you have to decrypt it to get any value out of it. And it's all those IDs that access your encrypted data, that's your vulnerability and where you're going to get hacked. So again, how do we eliminate risk from masking? In production, we'll mask your data and send it downstream as protected or fictitious data. And again, the real reason why, that's the pointer? Yeah. The real reason why encryption falls down here, right? If this data is encrypted, and I got all these different use cases I have for my data, if it's encrypted, I have a lot of IDs that will have access to decrypt that data, or else it's not usable, right? Encrypted data is, pretty much worthless. That's why you encrypt it. So if you lose it, it's worthless. But if I mask this data, it's now able to be used in all these different forms or for all these different use cases, but yet I still have eliminated my risk, because if that data leaks, it's not real information, right? And this meets breach notification laws in every state. It meets the GDPR. You are not liable to announce a breach, notify people if mass data leaks out. So it opens up a lot of use cases now where you can free up your data and use it in public clouds with partners to do cloud-based analytics, open up hybrid clouds, community clouds. There's a bunch of different types of projects that now get enabled because you're not worried about that data sprawl and that huge increase in data risk that goes along with it. So what Delphix has done is we acquired a company called Access Technologies, which has been around for a number of years in the data masking space, a very mature solution. integrated it with our core technology, which is data virtualization, I'll talk about in a second. But what we are able to do now is give you everything you need for data masking across multiple platforms, right? So we're able to profile, go out and scan data repositories and identify sensitive data, and we can actually do that based on some type of regulation like HIPAA or PCI. Once we identify the data, we're able to assign a masking algorithm, one that might be pre-built, templates provided by us, or one that you can edit in our graphical user interface. Automatically assign that, and then automatically mask the data, again, without any coding. This is a mature GUI-driven product, not scripts and codes, which some of our competitors are doing, and give you complete audit, give you the ability, again, if you do have some type of breach event, some type of security event, you need to know exactly what your posture is, right? Where were they exactly, what data was there, and what form was that data in? So this gives you full audit and verification capability to say, okay, we had a breach on AWS. I know that there was no non-masked data in that environment, so I immediately know what the posture of my data is in that environment, so I can report back, where we are, where we stand as far as exposure. Mm-hmm.
So from your real data masking to the not real data, do you have a connection going back?
Yeah. So the question is, I mask. Can I actually get back to the original values? So the answer is yes, if you want to. You have a lot of use cases where you want to do a one-way hash, and I don't need to ever get back to that original value, so you would just do it that way. If you do need to get back, we can create a token, a table, if you will, which is actually pretty similar to how one-time pad works, where only at your home area is the only place where I have the information that can get me back to the original, right? So if I send data up in AWS, there's nowhere up there that actually has a table to get you back to the original values.
If I could, Charles, hi, I'm Vivek Uniyal. I'm the account director at Delphix.
Speak up. Mic's not on.
Mic's not on? I appreciate it. Thanks. So I'm Vivek Uniyal. I'm the account director at Delphix. And one of the things I wanted to say real briefly, the typical use case for Delphix would be you would not mask anything on the production side of the house. You would mask the copies that you would make for delivery to downstream environments. And there are two aspects of the solution. One of them is the one-way masking. It is irreversible. And the second is the tokenization, which Charles talked about, where you have the ability to revert to the original format under some very controlled conditions. So if you're looking at Delphix masking, irreversible, one way. If you're looking at Delphix tokenization, yes, you would be able to go to its original format. Hope that answers the question.
How do you secure your tokens if you want to do reverse engineer working on premise, right?
Right.
And never into the cloud.
Correct.
And store with your data or database.
Mm-hmm.
So we can mask databases as well as flat files. So it could be XML, it could be CSVs, whatever else. And we would mask it consistently. So if you had referential integrity, which I'm sure Charles would refer to in a bit, we would maintain it across various databases, various flavors of databases, could be Oracle, SQL Server, DB2, whatever else, mainframe-based databases, or even flat files.
Yeah, and that's important because you don't have to use Oracle masking for your Oracle data, and Optum for your IBM, and Informatica for different databases, data stores that you're using, right? You could use one masking algorithm across all of them, and then do better analytics because you're getting the same referential integrity across all of them. So Delphix in general, we've been talking about data privacy and data security, what we're doing with masking. The overall solution actually has a lot more benefits as well. It's data virtualization, which is something fairly new. So let's talk about that for just a few seconds. Where customers typically use us is any solution where you need to deliver data faster in an environment for accelerating application development, hybrid DR, things like that, migrations into private public clouds or into a new data center, and then obviously the data masking piece as well. So in a nutshell, what Delphix has done is basically eliminated all the steps that it takes to deliver data in an environment today. So typically, this is on the left here is one of our financial customers. The process it takes them for a developer to request a new environment took them about weeks to months, depending on the system, right? And what Delphix does is basically eliminate all of these steps and provide self-service access to data to be automatically provisioned in minutes. And we're talking about terabyte databases provisioned in minutes, multiple. So how are we actually doing that? What is the secret sauce, the magic? So we connect to databases, application binaries, file systems. We are a software solution. So we run on a hypervisor like VMware, we run on Zen, we run up in AWS on their AMI. Once we have a one-time copy of the data on the left, we are able to then produce virtual copies of the data to the downstream environments on the right. So what does that do? That means I am sharing the data blocks here underlying and creating multiple containerized virtual environments on the right. So you can really, the easiest way to think about what Delphix is doing is exactly what VMware did 15 years ago at the server and infrastructure layer, right? You used to have 10, 15 compact ProLiants under your desk that were everywhere, and you'd have a single server on each, right? Then VMware walked in and said, hey, I can give you 15 servers on one, 15 virtual servers, right? And you can now don't have to have all this redundant hardware. And people said, oh, it's not going to scale. We're going to have security issues. You're going to have the servers stepping over each other, and it's not going to perform well. But they were able to get over that, and now server virtualization is prevalent. It's a no-brainer. It's everywhere. We really just moved up the stack. So we do the same thing with data. We take in a data source, again, a database, binaries, file system. We compress it. We look at the incremental changes, and we do this by looking at change logs and things like that. So there's zero touch on production. But we basically give you a timeline, a time flow, almost if you're familiar with the Macintosh time machine, for all of your data. Right, so you're getting something called continuous data protection by default with our solution. So I can go back to any point in time for a transactional database like Oracle. I can actually go back to a single transaction and say, spin up my environment from this point. So we share those data blocks, and instead of sending large data blocks or large databases back out to all those environments and copying that data all over your environment over and over and over again, we just basically act as storage and are able to provision virtual data into your environments. So again, what's very important here is that the dev, test, reporting, offsite, anything you want to do, they're interacting with the data as if it was physical data. They have no idea because the data is in the exact format they would expect. Again, same way you log onto a server today, somebody gives you an administrator username and password, you log on, you don't even know if that's a virtual or physical server. You're getting an IP address, you get username, password, boom, you're away. Same thing here. All your applications will work exactly the way they're expected to work because they're interacting with the data in the format that they're expecting it to be in. So from an architecture perspective, we basically can run on any storage. So you allocate some storage for us. We do a one-time copy, which can actually be off a backup, right? We don't even need to ever touch production to get the data into Delphix. And then we are spinning up containerized data environments for all of your downstream environments. And now, you can have 50 of these downstream environments all working off of one Delphix engine with zero touch back to production while still staying in near real time with production. Right, so it's a very unique, innovative leap forward in storage and data management.
This would be a place for me to jump in again, Charles, if you don't mind. So, one of the biggest constraints in accelerating test dev is the ability to create test environments. There are very few, and it takes a lot of effort to create them and provide data that's relevant for those test environments. We have our customers coming back to us and saying the first time we do any testing against full copies of data is when we are so late in our production, in our development cycle, that it becomes prohibitively expensive for us to go back and fix it in time to make the release. With the ability to provide these virtual databases, again, this is a patented software technology from Delphix, you now can provide those developers, testers, those sprint teams, the ability to create those test environments with data that's representative of your production environment, and they have the flexibility of using that entire data set if needed. Now, think about this in terms of what it does to your data sprawl, right? If you now had the ability to create 50 different copies of 50 different environments in a physical environment, what does that do for your data? What kind of sprawl is it, right? So what Delphix is providing you using this database virtualization technology, an ability to contain that database sprawl by leveraging one single console, one single unit through which you can see who has data, why do they need it, how long do they need it for, what kind of data is it? Is it masked or unmasked? What happens to that data after you're done with it? So we are helping you with data governance, we are helping you improve data privacy, and we are reducing your risk profile. So we're containing database sprawl and reducing the risk of data breach. Thank you, Charles.
Sure, and then, so we have customers, for example, who used to have 2 or 3 dev and test environments because of the challenge of getting the production environment copied over and into dev and test. So then they looked at Delphix and said, wow, this is amazing. With the way you guys are managing data, I'm actually using less storage, and I could have 100 copies of my production database. I give 1 to each developer, and I think we can literally go from releasing applications twice a year to twice a month. Huge advantage, competitive advantage to be able to do that. So as they started going through the project, a CISO raised their hand and said, wait a second, did you just say you're making 100 copies of production and giving 1 to every developer? Because if that's what you said, I think my head's going to explode. You can't have that much data. This was a company that was PCI. You can't have that much. I can't sign off on protecting all of that data, right? And that's where the masking came in. So how about we mask everything downstream, and you actually are eliminating your risk in all of those environments, and now you have a better risk posture than you had before Delphix with, 25 times the environments. So a couple things you immediately get with Delphix. One, you massively decrease your storage needs, especially for downstream, because I'm now taking all of those use cases that I kind of showed earlier. I'm saving the storage that it would take to provide those environments with data. We also, because the data is virtual, are able to provide the types of controls that you're not able to do with physical data. For things like being able to roll back to any point in time, being able to line up multiple environments to an exact point in time and then spin those all up. So that's great for integration testing, analytics. We have companies using it for analytics as well. The ability to bookmark and share environments, to automatically mask environments like we talked about. And then, again, that time machine that we give you to go back to any point in time means you can archive off environments for compliance reasons or any other reasons and bring those back very quickly. Like I mentioned, we are a completely GUI-driven software product. So whether you are a end user, developer, analyst, and you're going in through self-service and a timeline of the data in your environment and clicking a button and saying to deploy or to share, this is a huge leap forward. Like the way this is done today is a ton of command line tools and multiple administrators touching your data. So like Vivek was saying, the time that it takes to break down and rebuild environments basically gets eliminated. And now you don't have developers waiting for all that time. You don't have analysts waiting for the data to get to them and someone else provision it. You basically have self-control access to all your data. So what that means with masking is you now get that same level of efficiency on your masked data, right? So Gartner actually said that the reason why masking hasn't been applied as widely as it should be by now is because of those operational inefficiencies of getting the data masked again and then back out to the people who need it, right? So that's exactly what Delphix solves by bringing together virtualization and masking, right? There's probably some of you in this room who own data masking. It's sitting on the shelf. You don't use it anymore. Probably one of the reasons is when data changes, you got to mask it again. You got to get it back out to the people who are using it. And that's exactly what Delphix provides. We let you mask your data once as it comes in, and then you're able to send masked data out to multiple environments. And then because it's virtual data, and we're able to do this very quickly, even for 5 terabyte, 10 terabyte, more databases, we eliminate that inefficiency of getting data out to the people who need it, and we're masking it in line. So along with the masking, you also are reducing risk because you have now much fewer admin level accounts accessing your data. And if you go back over the breaches, especially the major breaches in the last 2 years, it's those supervisor admin accounts downstream that typically seem to be the way in. So the more accounts, the more admin accounts, supervisor level accounts that you can eliminate from your environment, touching your data, going through that whole process, the better you're going to be protected because there's fewer ways in for the identity breach. And then along with the masking as well, like I mentioned, you have a data record of what's masked, who's accessing your data, as well as the ability to recover from some type of event. I mean, if you think of some of the larger breaches like Sony, one of their challenges was trying to get back to before the breach happened and get their systems back up from that point in time to see what the delta was, to see what happened, and also just to get back up and operating. Right? So with Delphix, you can literally, once you find out, here was, moment 0, day 0, here's where they got in, I could just rewind all my Delphix environments to prior to that point and come back up, and I'm back up and running. And we actually have customers who have bought us for the app dev use case to accelerate, mobile application development, and have used us for their recovery engine because they were able to recover out of Delphix 10, 20 times faster than their backup solution. Right? Because with backups, you gotta, bring something up, reconstitute a full backup, take a look and see what the status is, and then go to the next one. Right? With Delphix, I literally have a slider. I can just move back and forth, provision multiple in parallel environments to see where exactly where the moment was that the error occurred, and then I know just to rewind a little bit and bring that up right from there. So we have, even though we're a fairly young company, about 4 or 5 years that we've been selling so far, we do have a very extensive and impressive customer list, about 30% of the Fortune 100. A lot of healthcare, a lot of finance, We work very well with regulated industries and large data sets. Usually the more data you have and the more restrictions you have, the more value you're going to find with Delphix. And one of our customers who was a fairly early adopter was Molina Healthcare, and Rick Hopfer, the CIO, has won multiple awards, industry awards for his implementation of Delphix, one from CIO 100. They've basically now virtualized and masked almost their entire non-prod environment. They've saved over 8 petabytes of storage. They have about 6,000 virtual environments on Delphix. But you know, the key for me, being a security geek, he feels that he's reduced his data risk by 80% by masking downstream. Because 80% of his PII, of his personal data that he has, is now masked, where it wasn't before. And again, at the end of the day, they actually got into this because they needed to increase their their application releases, right? So it's a software that gives you business value benefit, like getting to market faster, getting to a product out to your customers, introducing mobile applications and new features. It gives you those business value benefits that you can sell to the C-suite while also reducing risk and cutting costs, right? And that was that first slide I showed you. It's a unique, very unique solution in that you do get those business values, and you get to increase your security posture, and you actually get to pay for it with hard costs on your storage savings. So that's why I mentioned, not sure, you know, the range of industries that we may have in this room, but we probably have worked with a very large, very complex environment with another company in your industry that were able to kind of show you what they did and how they leveraged Delphix and the value that they got out of it.
I do want to add that in the state of California, we have had a customer for at least 3 years, the Department of General Services. They use us in their EBS environment, that I believe is an Oracle environment. And if you know people there, Gary Renslow is the CTO. He should be able to talk about how they're using Delphix. If you, California State Lottery is not a customer we signed up earlier this year. Their CTO is Darrell Young, and he would be able to talk about Delphix as well. We are, as Charles pointed out, working in various verticals, very highly regulated, compliance-driven industries in the finance, healthcare, and other related sectors. And those use cases replicate themselves when we go into federal, state, and county organizations. LA Healthcare is a great example where everything we learned from the commercial healthcare companies could be leveraged when we started working with them. There are certain government agencies in the federal space that, you know, again, we are cross-pollinating those ideas as you would expect a good partner to help not just with the database virtualization, but also to improve data privacy and data governance.
Yeah.
I have a question for you. So, number one, how the masking working with the encryption? So I already have a data encrypted, right?
Mm-hmm.
So your recommendation is just use masking without encryption, or how that?
You would want to mask the unencrypted data
Yeah, I know.
so that you can use it. There's no reason not to. Once it gets to the far side and it's sitting at rest, there's really no reason not to encrypt it, right? You might as well, because you don't need to, but most people, just in practice, most people still do,
Yeah.
because that's what they've been doing already anyway, and there's really not that much overhead. As long as you're not talking about encrypting live and decrypting on the fly out of a database, which is a lot of overhead. But you know, we tell people if you're more comfortable encrypting data on the far side, even if it's masked, go ahead. But yes, technically, once it's masked, you don't need to.
So I'll give an example where Delphix solution uses encryption, even though we wouldn't need to typically. When we are replicating data from one data center to another, or from one network zone to another, we make sure, even though our data is not readable, we make sure that's encrypted over the wire, right? So there are situations where you would find encryption a much more appropriate defensive measure. But for the use case that we are talking about, which is rapid delivery of data to non-production environments, having it encrypted doesn't serve the purpose because it will be decrypted when the consumers use it. And once it's clear text, then you can make a copy, even take a screenshot and start using it, right? But if the data is masked and you cannot trace it back to its original personally identifiable information is masked, you can't track it back to the individual, then you are in compliance with any regulations in that space, and it doesn't matter if it was encrypted over the wire or not. So that you have to judge the solution by the problem you're trying to solve. So the problem we are advocating that we do a great job of solving is rapid data delivery and eliminating personally identifiable information or PCI information from that data. Make sense?
Yeah.
Okay.
More questions?
Yep.
How about the backup data? So I already have a backup data, right? So when you back up all the time, you send to the cloud.
Mhm.
Right now I have encryption, but encryption key masters, which 35 years in masking.
Mm-hmm.
I know your solution is more into the development testing environment. This is still the backup data I need to.
Do you back up dev and test, or do you just back up production today? So, there's a couple ways. I mean, I haven't heard of anybody masking.
That's a good use case for encryption.
Yeah,
That's
I mean,
a good
if-
use case
if-
for encryption, because otherwise you would use tokenization.
That's true. I mean, I haven't heard of anybody using it for that. Like, if they have a backup and they're sending it off-site, do I want to maybe mask that backup in case it leaks out? I haven't heard of anybody, but there's no reason why you couldn't use it.
Yeah, I can mask the data, encrypt it, and come back or something. Because, encryption, they do have some issues with, especially into the cloud.
Oh, yeah.
I'll go back to the original point I made. Delphix has two solutions in the masking space. One is one-way masking, irreversible, right? You don't want to use that for DR. And the other one is the tokenization. So if you do tokenization and if you have policies around securing that, the tokens, then that's probably one area you could do. You could use it. The other piece to look at it as, what sections of your data do you actually want to be masked?
Yeah, that's my next question will be, what's the criteria you guys use to mask those data? I know I have PII data, I have credit card information. What about other sensitive information? Maybe not compliance requirement,
Mhm.
but it's critical to a business operation.
Yeah. Charles, do we have the slide that has the three tools, audit, mask?
Yeah, we showed that one.
Yeah.
So yeah, you
that
can
was it.
profile based on the templates that we have, or you can create your own. And then once we learn a format for a custom format that you may have, or obviously like an address, we have a bunch of things in there that might signify that this is PII. But again, you can build those on your own and then save that template. So now you have it stored, so you only have to build it once, and you can do your search and profile based on your own custom criteria, or the ones that we have, or some combination of both.
So you mean I have to self-identify those sensitive information? And
Great.
for you to run some mechanism to masking them. You said with real data, it's not fake data.
Correct. Well, we go out and find your PII on repositories, wherever you point us, and again, based on templates that we already have pre-built, or if you have some custom formats, some custom fields in databases that this field needs to be masked, we can set up the algorithm to automatically profile that and then assign the right masking algorithm based on what we found.
I just came from a healthcare meeting, and they were talking about masking, and they had these rules. If the person or the member is over 95 years old, their entire date of birth needs to be masked. If it's less than 95 years old, you can only do the partial, just as an example, right? So these are kind of rules that the tool allows you to make, right? We give you the ability to identify the at-risk field candidates. You decide what kind of algorithms out of the box you want to apply to them. In addition to that, we give you several extensible frameworks where you can either reuse existing tools that you might have or write your own using Delphix. So the policies are driven by the nature of your business, and we will help you implement them. That's actually another key difference between encryption and masking. Encryption is just flat encryption, doesn't care what kind of data it is. Whereas masking, you can selectively pick a, let's say, a social security number or a telephone number and say, I'm going to leave the area code of the telephone number as is. I'm going to change the last numbers. Or on the social security number, you could have the other way around. I'm going to leave the last 4 digits as is, change everything else. For the address, you could say, I want to leave the zip code as is, change everything else. So that kind of intelligence the tool allows you to apply.
And if the data set is too small that you're concerned about an inference attack, you actually have ways to handle that as well, where it can change the output so that it eliminates the inference. For example, if there was only one person over the age of 95, it's going to be easy to tell who that is, even if you do mask everything, right? So it's built into the software to be able to handle inference as well.
We would be hard-pressed to find a case that we haven't seen before. We may not have the most elegant solution for that case, but we can tell you how our other customers have utilized it. I want to be respectful of time. I saw
Yep, we only have a
couple minutes ago. Any other questions, please?
Yeah, we have customers who own Grid Tools, Optum, Oracle, and still bought Delphix, and that was Apple.
So we have a booth outside. Please feel free to swing by. If we can have a follow-up conversation, happy to do so. I have some business cards with me here today. Please feel free, if you want me to reach out to you, I can take your information, reach out to you. We have Vish Tegedi, who's the Director of Solutions Engineering at the Delphix booth today. Charles is the Director of Products, is also going to be there. I'm going to be there. My colleague Jeremy is going to be there. Thank you all for joining us. I really appreciate it late in the day. Much appreciated.
Thanks a lot.